But first off, I just wanted to thank everybody, especially as I was saying, there's 42 circles that Maureen pointed out in our region. And I'm not sure when I first was introduced to Maureen and CoSA how many circles there were, but I'm pretty certain there wasn't anywhere near 42. So it's a big jump in volunteer work that all of you are doing. And it's so significant to my to helping the clients that I have. You know, I volunteer outside of my work as well, and it sometimes feels kind of thankless, and you know, we don't always do it for celebrity status, but it is nice to be acknowledged, and I just want you all to be acknowledged today, and let you know how much we appreciate it from CSC. I see it all the time with my clients when I talk to them. Almost every time I touch base with my guys on a weekly basis, they tell me how their CoSA meetings are going and how much you all mean to them. A lot of my clients, they really don't have anyone. When they come out of prison, they've lost all their friends, their associates, the media coverage of their offending, that what have you. Some have been in jail so long that they've been forgotten about. And to be able to come out and have this support is very meaningful to them. And it's very helpful to us in corrections when we're working with these individuals. Without a community and support, these individuals would fall back into their behavior, because we all know when they isolate and are alone, that's when they tend to offend. So you're a big role in that reintegration and that change for them. So I applaud you and appreciate you, and thank you for all you do. So that's what the big thank you on the screen is for. As you know, I am Scott Gibson. I've been working with corrections over 16 years. Before that, I worked at a halfway house in New Westminster called Genesis House. My background is a Bachelor of Policing. I ended up in corrections after working through Genesis House. I've mainly done correctional programs my entire time with corrections. I've done a little bit of parole work, but it wasn't for me, and I ventured back to programs shortly, about a year after that experience, and I thought, no, programs is for me. So here I am, still delivering programs. So I was asked to talk tonight about the hidden signs, about what I guess CMs aren't telling us, or maybe, sorry, what they are telling us without actually telling us. I sat and I talked to my colleagues about this topic at length in preparing for this presentation, trying to think. I did some research even. And what I did find with research is that, you know, there's all sorts of different things out there where people analyze body language and, you know, different expressions and what have you. And to be honest with you, in my opinion, it was kind of phooey. It was very television-esque, right? It just doesn't seem like it'd be something that's realistic. So I want to keep this pretty simple and focus to what it is that we're doing with these clients, with our clients, and really what we're trying to do is help and provide support and an opportunity to make better and healthier decisions. And being held accountable is part of that, and what CoSA stands for in keeping these clients, your clients, the CMs, on track. So I kind of used some cartoons today. My mentor, when I first started with corrections, he's now left corrections, but he created the ICPM program. His name was John Eno. He used a lot of Far Side jokes, and so I decided I was going to follow his lead today. And my slides are Far Side jokes with little headings to kind of call on all of you to participate. So I would like, maybe if you have something to add or would like to, when I call upon you, if there's some way, can we put up a hand signal on this venue? just trying to look at, yeah, there we go. So Claudia, there we go. Perfect. So what Claudia just did, if you can all figure out how to do that, that would be awesome. So what I'm going to ask is when you have a question or when I've posed a question to the participants, if you could throw your hand up and let me know, and we'll try to have an interaction and a good discussion today. So without further ado, I will kick it off. Once I figure out how to go to the next slide. And I'm sure I can do that. Or maybe not.
What happens if
Oh, there we go. There he is. Yay. I figured it out. All right. So my first heading when we come into working with our clientele, trying to understand whether or not they're telling us everything or feeling, or they're willing to share stuff with us. I thought this was a pretty good example of what we're all doing when we go into one of those first meetings with our guys. We all kind of go in there, wait a minute, isn't anyone here a real sheep, it says. Well, we all kind of go in there uncomfortable, unsure, all putting on a mask of some sort, protecting ourselves, the offenders protecting themselves. Everybody's sort of going into these meetings a little unsure of where things are going. And I think being authentic is where we want to start. And I'm going to pose that a question to all of you, maybe someone can answer it, is how does being authentic with our CMs important in getting the relationship built? And maybe just share some examples as well from your experience.
Anyone can just speak up, right?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
If they unmute, don't forget to unmute.
Yeah. Hi, Scott. Thank you. The moment you said that, I really immediately thought about the way we open the every meeting, not every circle, which is by sharing the struggle we have for the week. And it's so funny you say to be authentic, because I always try to find the struggle that is less authentic, or maybe I should say that it doesn't bother me so much. Right. And I think last week or the week before, I went in and I'm like, you know what, today I'm actually going to share a struggle that is really, really bugging me. And I don't know if this answers your question. And I was thinking, I'm really being vulnerable here. I don't know if the core member is getting it. I think it was showing from my voice, from my face, that I was kind of struggling. So I guess, yeah, maybe from now on, I'll try to always share a struggle that is quite vulnerable, but that will be for me a way to be authentic, I guess.
Nice. Yeah, Claudia, I think you know, you always have to be careful because we are working with a certain clientele, but we can be authentic and we can share struggles. I often will share a struggle I've heard from somebody else and pretend it's mine. It's okay, right? But it's being authentic in the fact that we're trying to make every interaction that we have with these gentlemen to realize that just because they're facing a problem or a difficulty, that's normal, that we all are going through different levels of it, and normalizing some of these challenges is very important for our clientele, because kind of when they end up on an extreme end of things, whether they feel the world's out to get them or they think that they're great, one way or the other, their grandiose expression or their being isolated and feeling negative leads them to offending. So bringing things back to a normal state of, hey, you know, we all have these same problems, similar, we just deal with them differently. It provides not only that it's normal to have similar problems, but part of being human is learning from mistakes and getting better and learning from each other. And where better is CoSA for providing that support to this clientele. So when they're seeing me on a regular basis, I'm telling them the same thing. We're all speaking the same language and trying to help them navigate this. So that authentic piece is really important in understanding, you know, where we're letting the offender know where we're coming from and letting them understand that we care, I think, ultimately. And how would that, in your opinion, how has that, or maybe someone can give an example of how that authenticness over time with their CMs has paid off in dividends in what they've shared with you? Miriam, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. We share our struggles with them every time, with him every time we go. And I found that when we are genuine and tell him that we've been going through these struggles and that we get mad, he's able to open up and share a lot more, because he knows that we are also going through similar struggles that he is going through.
Exactly, right? It's that authenticness and that genuineness that brings out somebody being able to share something. I think in our early stages of meeting somebody, especially in our early stages of our CMs, and what I hear from some of the clients that I work with, is that initially when they meet their CoSA groups, they're a little bit uncomfortable, they're unsure. They had to, you know, their first meeting, they shared a lot of details about them. They're feeling very vulnerable. And I often hear, you know, I feel like I'm on trial kind of thing, and I don't hear anything from them. And then as time moves on, I watch these relationships build and this comfortability grow. And these same clients are now saying, you know, I see them as friends. I know that there's boundaries there, but I have somebody to talk to. I can lean on and ask for support and get help, which is exactly what Miriam was saying. And that is what we're trying to achieve, because that's where we're going to get that real, genuine information that we're seeking from them. If we don't have a healthy, strong support or comfort and vulnerability in that room, chances are we're all going to feel uncomfortable, like those sheep in that picture. We're all guessing all the time what's going on, and that isn't a successful. I wouldn't say that would be a successful group. Okay, go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I was with the RCMP for many years, and I was an interrogator. And I found in an interview with a person, you know, if you just are friendly and approachable and make yourself vulnerable, people would confess. It's just so I would open up and tell them my struggles, and it was very fruitful.
And I, you know, hearing from someone who's got that background, it's very true. It's exactly, you know, we all want to tell our story. You know, part of facilitating and being a good facilitator, or learning to be a good facilitator, is when I don't have the answers, I turn to my audience and they answer my questions for me. And thank you, Andy, you did great there. You get that feedback, and it presents itself. And that's what happens. Everybody wants to tell their story, and so do these individuals. Yeah, they're used to being interviewed on a regular basis, so they have got lots to say. So perfect. Yeah, thank you very much. So that is the importance of being authentic, building that rapport. People are willing to share more, like Andy points out. We build that trust over time. The more trust we have, the more vulnerable we feel we can be with our supports. And I guess when we feel comfortable, we're less likely we're less likely our thought patterns and what we're paying attention to is there's less interference, and we could pay attention to the important details about the individual. Those times where you say, well, what was he wearing earlier, and was he agitated, or you're asking yourself questions after it. I think when we're comfortable and we're sitting in there, we're paying attention to that body language and that behavior more easily, because we're not worrying about or stressing other factors. So an important part of the interrogation, as Andy put it, or in our case, the support network we're creating. So it works in both environments. Isn't that something? So the next part, when I was asking myself and talking to other people, is oftentimes we're faced with uncomfortable questions that zip through our minds. We think, oh, I can't ask that. I shouldn't ask that. But it's funny, because on that next part I write, everyone eventually respects that person who challenges them. And that comes from my clients. It comes from their mouths. That's not something I've read anywhere or experienced. I do experience it myself. But those clients I work with that get challenged by someone, they seem to really grow a lot of respect towards those individuals. They really hold them accountable. And CoSA does achieve that with a lot of the participants. So I think it's a really important question. It's very important to ask those questions. When we don't ask those questions, you probably end up at home, and maybe someone could give an example of this, where you get home and you're laying there going, I should have asked that question. Why didn't I ask that question? Oh my gosh, what's going to happen now? I didn't ask that question. And you ponder this, and then you plan on asking it next time you see them, but the opportunity doesn't present itself. Now, I don't think there's a bad question necessarily when we're working with our clientels. Nothing we say really from a genuine caring place is going to push someone over the edge. So it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to ask a question incorrectly. You're always able to apologize and excuse yourself, but try to get comfortable with asking those uncomfortable questions that come into your mind. Take a moment to think about why you have that question, and phrase it so that it's done in a kind way. But in a lot of cases, as Andy pointed out, and as we discussed before, someone does something, they want to share, they want help. But for a lot of our clients, when they've made a mistake, as it shows in the picture there, they're kind of damned if they do, and they're kind of damned if they don't. And, meaning that they're getting in trouble regardless. So if we have that rapport, and we have that comfortability with them, and we ask those uncomfortable questions, we may be able to get them to open up and share something that could actually really support them in their change and their and making the all-around difference in not going back to jail or coming clean with their parole officer. It might, show them a pattern of behavior that they're less likely, or in the past have less likely gone down, and see the value in being able to be honest and true. Has anyone ever had that happen in a group, where something you're finding yourself asking a question and then having to coach them into some really difficult choices they're going to have to make? Yeah, go ahead, Maria.
Yeah, RCM had an offer with BCLC, and he was very, very keen. BC Liquor, sorry.
Yes.
BC Liquor, and he was very keen on getting the job because it was paying really well. And we encouraged him, but when we came home, I thought about it, and I was thinking maybe it's not good for him to get that job, because you're open to temptation there.
Right.
And he went through the whole interview, everything, and at the very last bit, they told him that he didn't get the job. I think because it was of his background,
Yep.
and he was really cut up. But so when we met a couple of weeks later, it went on over 3-4 weeks. And after we met on the 4th week, when he didn't get the job, I said, I guess if you think of it this way, I think it's the best thing that has happened, because you don't want to be open to such temptations. And he's saying, no, I won't fall. But then he went back to cigarettes. So I said, just an example, you've gone back to cigarettes. So you could fall. Everybody could fall. I could fall.
Yeah.
So that was an example where he realized, and he's pretty young. So I sort of talked to him like a son, more than, like being gentle, but still trying to, I always tell him I treat you like my son. So he knows that I'm trying to just guide him and, help him along. And he
Nice.
appreciates that very much.
Lovely. Thanks, Miriam.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you as you connect in your circles, as you all know, these are great examples of where that relationship's building, and we are able to question them. I mean, what a great opportunity for that member, CM, to go through a whole interview process, and fail. That always sucks. Rejection's terrible, but it's a great experience. That whole experience that individual went through was a great experience. And then to have those important questions of how it might have impacted them after the fact, and having those discussions makes a huge difference, to be able to at least work through the process, and being there for each other, and posing those questions of whether or not maybe that would have been a bad play, might have worked out in a harmful way for working around those triggers all that time. We're often just reading my notes, sorry. I had a question here. It says, sometimes we never got we'll ask a question and we won't get a response, but later down the road, the CM actually kind of refers back to exactly what the question was, and says, I almost answered that question because but I didn't feel comfortable at the time, but now when I think about it, and then they share their comment. I run into that often, where I'll pose a question to somebody, and I guess in a sense, they put on a bit of a mask, and I could tell there's something there, and they probably a little bit of overcompensation, and they start to dodge and weave around the question a little bit. And I don't pressure too hard. I just kind of continue to take the same challenge that I've posed to them. And on a number of occasions, that's come back later down the road, where the person said, I remember that time you asked me this question. And I say, yeah, I do remember that. And then they say, well, I was actually going to say that you were right, but I at the time, I didn't want to admit that, and it's those types of things that are real breakthroughs, I think, for that relationship we're building with our guys. So asking that uncomfortable question sometimes maybe gets answered 6-7 months down the road, but they come back and reflect on it. And it's I don't think these questions hurt, and they certainly provide more assistance and support than keeping them to ourselves. So by all means, when you feel uncomfortable, take a moment to think about the question, because you don't want to offend or anything, saying something off the top of your thought, but take a moment to maybe write it down, what your question is, and frame it in a way you want to present it. But there are lots of times where we're going to encounter these moments with our clientele. And I think it's important for getting dialogue going too. I don't know, is any of the groups, or do a lot of the groups find that sometimes it's like pulling teeth in there, or is it usually a really easy discussions?
Yeah, yes, Scott. I am remembering an uncomfortable experience we had some time back with a core member who was becoming less and less. Oh, he kept repeating himself, and then we started to notice his clothing was getting in shabby shape and all that. And it was a surprise, but it was not a complete surprise when we asked him what's going on, and nothing. And that, like you said, the question festers, and it comes back to the bench. He says, well, I offended again. I was arrested. I'm on bail. I've been kicked out of my house.
Wow.
So we had a lot of discussion. And I think where it comes in, because it matches the other one, what we really broke it down to is when you offended, that was weeks, maybe more than a month ago. Why did you not tell us? Now, we're not pushing him hard. We're looking for a way, because if he's on bail, you know, the circle doesn't have to die, things like that. It's a new offense. Well, it probably should have died, but anyways, that's not my choice, not my decision. But as being authentic, we want to know, why didn't you tell us? We've been so open. You've been discussing very personal things with us. And we tell you our struggles without being too juicy about the mistakes in earlier life and all that. And eventually, and it was like pulling teeth, he said, I didn't want to admit to you that I failed. And so we had to ask him, can you commit, go back and commit to be truthful and honest with us? And he said, again, more teeth pulling. He said, no, I can't. I need to hide. I'm putting his word now. He needed to hide his secret. He was too ashamed. And those teeth can be really good to pull sometimes. Sometimes they uncover what you don't really want in this business is the deception. And but you know, these things do happen, and that's another thing we have to learn how to coax the information out. And if we could have gotten the information earlier, I'm sure we could have helped them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Scott,
Yeah.
if I could just add, in the question of core members not answering questions, I think we face something a little different than you do as one person. When you have 3 or 4 on a circle and you ask the tough question, it is very, very hard to give him the silence for everyone to stay quiet while he answers. There's always a rescuer or someone who jumps in. And that, I find, is the hardest thing with the uncomfortable questions is how do we, as volunteers, as human beings, comfortable with that silence? Because we're not. We all want to help them, or there's someone who wants to. So
That's right.
someone asks a tough question and someone else bails them out. And that's something that is an issue, I think, in CoSA, because it's 3 or 4 volunteers.
Yeah, and I think that'll bring us to our last slide that I have here. But it's really it's about how we work together, and you know, I co-facilitate sometimes, and it's the same thing as I think that's preparation and being prepared. If you know, discussions that you have as you develop your group with each other. I'm sure groups that have been together a long time probably are able to use that silence better. In facilitation, you know, my partner facilitates as well. She's not with corrections, but she facilitates trainings and what have you. And she kind of was peeking over my shoulder while I was getting prepared for this, and she said, she says, you know, are you all ready? And I said, yeah. And if I'm not, I said, I'm just going to use silence to get people to talk. and she looked at me and she goes, yeah, silence, you know, and made some comment about how silence is such an effective way of getting people to talk. So, you know, you're bang on, Maureen. I think think using silence in your groups, listen to Maureen there. It is very effective. I think I sat probably, it felt like maybe 5 minutes. It was probably 40 seconds or not even. And Miriam spoke up, but it felt like a long time from a presenter's point of view. It wasn't, but it sure felt like it. So you have to get through that discomfort, but the better we get at it, it's amazing how it works at getting that information and getting our clientele or our CMs in your case to speak up. So yeah, as a group, you're gonna have to work at that for sure. It's a big turning point when you get a good handle on it. So. And I bail them out all the time too, because sometimes I'm just not prepared or something comes up. I feel like I gotta help them too, so I'm guilty as charged. Listening to your gut. I think this is a very important thing. Our instincts are based on our observations. Why did I feel that way? Well, take a moment, think about why you're feeling that way, because there's something going on, right? Richard says, oh, his clothes were changing. There was something different, right? Every time he showed up, and we were slowly picking up on these things. Very, very important. I had a client, I'm going to go back, share an example. He probably worked with all of you at one point. He came out, and he had come out, and he walked the same route, and there was some concern about a park he was walking through, because there was there was a lot of sort of trying to be polite in my term, people that were struggling, homeless sort of folks, and sex trade workers and what have you. And this gentleman had taken a life when he was quite young. It was a historical offense that he went to jail for, and he did a life sentence for. But he took a life when he was quite young of an age appropriate young girl that he had known in the neighborhood, and he wasn't much more than, I think, 17 or 15 or something. Raped, murdered her, and buried her in some leaves, and just walked away. And it went unanswered, the investigation, for a long time, and then they finally caught him. So he went to prison a long time, came out and was working for us. So we were quite concerned about his interactions with sex trade workers. And he came in one day and using sort of silence, and something didn't seem right about his, I'd asked him what he had done that day and where he was coming from. And he told me, and I could tell he wanted to tell me about an interaction. So I kind of used silence, and I prompted him, and he shared some examples he shared a story about how he ran into this woman. And I again prompted a few questions, and as it went on, he's telling me, well, I shared with her what my past was. And I said, well, how did you get to that point? Like, why did that come up? Right. And as he shared, I learned that, a great deal of information, and discovered by asking some of those hard questions that he'd actually met her before, and that this had been something that he had done a few times. So then I asked him how many times he's met her, and he opened up. And then I asked him how many times, did he go that route today? Because it wasn't really a direct route to the parole office. Did you take that route on purpose and hoping to run into her? And then I would share an example. I remember I had a crush on a girl, and I would go well out of my way to encounter her if I thought I might have a chance seeing with her, maybe share an example. And sure enough, he says, yeah, I was. And so as we got talking, I realized that there was a lot going on here. And so what I did is I actually, in the next part of our discussion, I'm going to talk about baseline, is I looked at his baseline. I looked at his past behavioral patterns, and we kind of, using a flip chart, wrote all of his past negative behavioral patterns on the flip chart. And then beside it, I wrote what he was doing. And it was almost like putting his crime cycle together. And it was everything, his thinking, everything fit in line with what he had told us was his crime cycle. You know, and in that case, I actually called what's called the National Monitoring Center, who's an after-hours parole officer that works for the province or for the country, and had made arrangements with a halfway house who were still supportive of keeping him out, to just have him confined to the CRF, and I would drive him to the CRF community residential facility until he saw his parole officer the next day, and they go from there. And so we were able to keep him out actually under that circumstance, and we worked with him going forward and tackled a number of issues. Unfortunately, he would eventually get his own place and eventually started to engage with another sex trade worker, and he's now back in jail, and I'm not sure if he'll be back out again. He's quite an aging man. And there was some pornography issues that came up, but these things were coming up because of the relationship we built, that authenticity, you know, asking the right questions. And then really important part was this here, listening to our gut and asking the right questions when something didn't feel right. And just picking up on those things. So, which brings me sort of this next point, which is we should know their behavioral pattern. You know, the first time you meet with your client, I believe the CMs are required to tell you their offense, tell you all about what happened. I'm not sure how CMs, and maybe someone can share with me, what details you look at. When we look at this, we call it a behavioral pattern. I like to use the term behavioral pattern rather than crime cycle to just take some of the stigma off of it. I call it a problematic behavioral pattern. And I get the individuals to tell me what those patterns look like. And we look at the thought process, we look at the environment, the situations that they encountered leading up to that. You know, why they thought that way. Oftentimes that relates to stuff that maybe happened in their childhood. They get into quite detail about it. We find out the insecurities behind that individual. And I'm assuming when you meet with your CMs and they share these details, you're getting some of those juicy bits and pieces from your clients. So let me ask you this. If you're talking to your friend, to your CM, and he tells you that, you know, growing up, he felt ostracized and picked on. How is that helpful today in developing our baseline and knowing if there's patterns that we should be looking for? How is that going to help you identify if he's telling you something's wrong without actually telling you? I can rephrase the question if anyone needs me to. Let me ask the parents out there, or newly parents who have young children, grandparents, what have you. What are some patterns that you look for when you're downstairs cooking dinner or getting something prepared? What often gets your attention that you have to go check on the children?
Silence.
Silence. Too
Right?
quiet.
It is just too quiet up there. What is going on? These are the things I want you to think about with your CMs. If we understand their patterns of behavior, if we've got to know them and we've seen their baseline, any abnormality in that baseline is our key to say, hey, something's not right. Right?
there's an interesting behavior I've seen a lot in the past, is when they repeat their best case scenarios.
Hmm.
Maybe where they successfully avoided a trigger, or where they had some success with this, or they had a good relationship. And they will, I've seen many times, almost word for word, the same terms, and sometimes even exactly the same story repeated, as if we all had Alzheimer's and forgotten what they said last month.
Right. Yeah. I like to call it overcompensating, right? You see it a lot. We do see it a lot. And I think it's normal if you're sitting there with a label of sex offender, and you know, these constantly being interviewed, constantly trying to navigate, you know, maybe some very disturbing thought patterns, and trying to change those ways of seeing the world. You're hiding a little bit of stuff, and you know, we're trying to help them to navigate that. So if we see discrepancies in what they're saying, or that, you know, repeated overcompensation, or telling us a story over and over again to get buy-in, that they're really great people, there's something going on there, and we can try to open the door for a little further discussion of what they're feeling. You know, is there a fear there? Is there, you know, why do you feel you got to tell us how great you are? Maureen, it looks like you wanted to say something.
Well, it's just for what I've noticed with the fellows that go back, or women that go back, it's not even so much the behavioral patterns of the past, it's of the current. On the circles, they come to the circles, they can't wait to come, they're talkative. All of a sudden, you know, they're quite busy, or they're tired, or, you know, they need to miss a week, or they come and they're not as talkative. So although behavioral patterns, I hear you, are very important that we understand them, I think equally as important is the behavioral pattern in the current week, current meetings, because I almost always get these maps from the circles, right? And they will say, he didn't seem interested, or he didn't seem himself, or he didn't share as much as he usually does. Sure enough, they're on that slope. Something's going wrong.
Yeah, it's really is when something changes, right? From their normal, we call it a baseline often in our work. You know, I know Andy and I share a few individuals, and I can see when that baseline goes off, especially with one that just moved to Surrey. You know, you know, if it's not a negative response and a complaint, and all of a sudden really happy, I'm actually more concerned when he's more happy. I start asking a few more questions. So, you know, it's trying to gauge those things. So really knowing the personality, and paying attention to those baselines. And when, like Maureen said, if something changes, right, or Richard pointed out, something changed, it doesn't seem right, get in there, ask some questions. So Maureen, were you gonna say something?
No, I know he's a CoSA guy as well, that Andy, and yeah, I've been trying to get him today, so I'm a little worried he's not answering my calls, and he normally does. So I'm looking at that behavior.
Yes, I have to call him too. I would like to follow up with him and make sure he's doing all right. So yeah, we have so, you know, the big things is understanding that baseline. In my line of work, I'm just trying to get to know that, you know, through those first points I've made, is developing that rapport that's really good, so that they feel comfortable coming to me. When they don't feel comfortable, at least I pick up on it, and that's when I might ask the right question, or throw the right thing out there. A little bit of a survival thinking on the boats. They're one of those little lifesavers, right? Throw it out there to them and see if they'll grab hold of it. They don't always, a lot of times they don't, but eventually they do feel more comfortable. I'm going to see a few LTSOs right now maybe reach their warrant expiry, and they haven't had much luck out in Belcombe House and other places, and we're getting them there. So pretty awesome to see that happen. And it's all part of that group of people working with them. Yeah, go ahead, Claudia.
Just a question, because I find it very difficult to find behavioral patterns, especially at the beginning. Once you get to know the core member a bit more, it seems like it's easier. But in a couple of situations, it happened that almost at the beginning of, I have one in the past and he went back. But this happened in the first few weeks of the circle. So then when he went back to prison because he breached, then of course you don't feel good as a volunteer. So you kind of need to act fast. So are there maybe tips on how to understand these patterns as soon as possible, I guess, or?
Yeah, I think it develops mostly over building that rapport. I think in the early stages of meeting the individual, understanding. I did write some notes here, see if they're helpful to me. When I look at somebody telling me I'm going to try to come up with something practical here on the fly. But if somebody, if I'm meeting with a client and he tells me that, while he was growing up, he struggled with hearing, was used sign language. His mom, actually I'll use a different fellow. This fellow, he as he was growing up, he had a stutter. His mom wasn't very, she was concerned about, it sounded like she was concerned about appearances. She would give him a hard time and actually tease him about his stutter and mock him a little bit. He ends up committing enough, and as he grows up, people make fun of him and what have you, and he feels that he's not fitting in. As he gets into his teenage years, he gets into some pretty dark fantasy. He ends up taking a life of a woman, and that's kind of the breakdown. When you look at that cycle, he talks about today, what kind of things might trigger him, and that's what we want to look at is what might trigger him to do a pattern of behavior. So somebody mocking him, probably a female, right? Somebody not being fair, or he doesn't perceive being treated fairly, being teased, rejected. Any of those types of things are probably really important to pay attention to. So if he goes for a job and now he's been rejected and he's got this history of being rejected, we might want to know that, hey, who's the who was this person who did the interview? Oh, her name was Maureen Donegan, right? Now we know it was a woman who also turned him down. Now we can actually ask a lot of questions about how he felt about that, and we might learn a lot in that moment. So that's just sort of an example, Claudia. I hope that helps, of things that we can learn from a crime cycle that can come in handy down the road when we encounter a situation. A lot of times they'll downplay it, but at least you've asked the question and put them on the spot. They know you're thinking about it. And then they often will go away and think about it themselves too. So hope that is helpful.
Thanks. Yes.
Okay, I think Richard kind of touched on this. Again, this is going back to baseline, Claudia, like we were just talking about. Right, guy sitting there emotionless, totally calm as a cucumber. No problem here. Whole building's on fire around him. Everybody else is running like crazy, but he don't. No problem here. I've got it. No problems. We see this all the time, don't we? Right? There's a situation happening. His whole life has been a struggle with rejection. His baseline is that he loses control when he gets rejected. He gets angry. He's demonstrated in our circles when somebody's disagreed with him or her. And then suddenly they come in and they tell us about the situation that's going on. And we say, how do you feel about that? Oh, I don't care. not a big deal. Eh. Ever been in that situation? Right? These are the big telltale signs, I think. Richard pointed out, so, you know, they come back to the story, some story that's totally irrelevant to managing this current situation, about how great they handled that situation. But the current situation, they can't provide examples. And as we dig around a little bit deeper into that situation, we start to see the neck turning red. We start to see them getting upset. You know, other things that I've picked up on is the choice of words that they use. You know, is it just a mild word, or do they go right to name calling? What is their body language telling us? They clenching their fists, all of those types of things. What aren't they telling us? Like Maureen pointed out, all of a sudden it's just silence. They're not sharing details, but their situation and their body language and everything else is telling a whole different story. I think these are the big telltale signs that something's underneath the surface that we need to scratch at a little bit deeper. In everyone's experience in the CMs, have you had to deal with this recently? Have you seen this? How did you manage it? Maybe I can get a couple examples of what this looks like, and how maybe some of the seasoned circles have dealt with this. Or just questions. Questions will do too. Go ahead, Andy.
Well, I don't know if our circle dealt with it that well, but I found with our fellow, who you know, I found he deflected, just deflected us to all sorts of other problems that and we very rarely got to talk about about him, except for some item that he'd ordered from England.
Yeah.
It was crazy. It was very difficult. The deflection was quite serious.
Sorry.
I think that's when we have to go back. I just continually do it to the intake form that they sign,
Yes.
which says they want a CoSA circle to help them to manage their risk to reoffend. And I think you heard me sort of say something like that, Andy, to him at the meeting. If you're not working on your risks, you know, if you don't want help to work on your risk to reoffend, or you don't think you have any, you don't need a circle. We have a lot of people who need circles. And so just to keep taking them back to that, I know it's hard, but that's what they sign up for. It's support and accountability, and the accountability is big. And when you talk about him, he was great at taking the support, right? The accountability was the really part that was kind of missing in it, right?
Yeah.
There's a process early on in the first couple of months of relationship, where they mostly want to talk about their day, what they did. And I've gotten shopping lists everywhere they went, everything they bought, how much they paid for it, what bus they took, you know. And even with our current member, we do not interrupt him when he wants to tell us how his day at work went, because he works anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a day. So it's a major part of his day. And we're listening for conflicts, things like that. But we don't let the meeting get even near halfway done, if we can avoid it, without saying, okay, what are your feelings? What we get down to the risk factors. Because I know we took, 4 to 5 minutes each. So it can be 10, 15 minutes of the meeting gone, our presentation of our day. And it's only reasonable he'll want to say something about his day. But there's the trick. And especially when they have stable lives, you know, they tend to do the same thing over and over again. Let's just quickly cut to the chase. I had a good day. I didn't have any major risk factors. Now let's get back to this thing that's been bugging you about seeing on TV when it cuts to and all the pink flesh starts coming on as they slap in a gratuitous sex scene. And that's an interesting thing we have to try and get to be good at. Wean them from telling us the mundane, because it's not fair to not let them have anything. Okay, I'm okay. Everyone here's okay. Right now, have you stopped masturbating? Yeah, that's a really hard. That's not how you have a particularly productive meeting. But you have to after you've gotten used to letting, and their days do sound the same, how to get it so you quickly go into the things that were left unsaid the last meeting. And I think with practice, at least I know I am, and Tina's getting really good at that. I'm in a circle with her, so and I can say I did not do that. I've been led around the nose from more than once about totally irrelevant things that sounded good but didn't matter.
Yep.
And I think that's where it's so important in our circles. Our check-in should be 30 seconds to 1 minute. And if we're focusing on something we're struggling with, rather than superficial, it's much easier for them to get to it. If we're talking, superficially, we just did that at a circle today. We decided to start again and try to do our check-ins properly. Because if we're not doing it properly, then it's very hard for them not to want to be casual and tell us about their week. And it's hard. We got to look at something we're working on, whether it's, if the guy suffers from anger, I check in on my road rage, and how I'm dealing with that, because we're trying to relate to him. But if we're talking about our life in general, and it's harder with some core members than others, but that's something that we're hoping to we've had whole training sessions, advanced training on check-ins, and we need to constantly be doing it. Yes. Because that's a real issue.
Yes, I think certain core members have a way of pulling that out of you. Just the way they can find if you're a rescuer, they can also find if you're a chatterbox, and they encourage you and get you into it.
I do find there's a genuineness to a lot of the guys. Obviously, I think any of us will take the easy way out of if somebody wants to talk for us. But so it is important to bring it back. But there's some techniques that I typically have found myself using, and they're quite effective, which is asking they're talking about their day, and I'll interrupt them and I'll say, you've told me about all the good things that happened today. What about the things that didn't go so well? That's one way. When you talk about masturbating, okay, it's great. So that's how you manage your masturbation. What does it look like when you aren't managing your masturbation? Like, what does that look like? What does a fantasy look like when you're not managing your risk factors? What would happen if you did masturbate all the time and started looking at pornography? Asking those more difficult questions that now the spotlight's kind of on them, and they can't really just skirt around it so easily. And then you let the silence sit there for a bit, right? So those are some good ways of tackling that as well. Andy, do you have anything to add from your experience, your years of interviewing?
I just wanted to add, Scott, just in addition to what Maureen already mentioned about the check-in.
Yeah.
It really helps when we really do prepare for what we're going to say when we check in. Especially if we've already been on a circle a few times and we kind of know more or less what the triggers of this guy might be, or what, what he struggles with, then it's easy to pull from our own experience, quote unquote, and try and relate something that might resonate with a core member, just so that, like Maureen was saying, then it's easier to go from there, rather than, come from a really broad topic like, the weather or whatever, and then get into something more specific and very personal. So I think it's really quite important to use the check-in properly, only because it really sets the tone.
I think Annie might want to say something. I see Gabrielle wants to say something as well, but I just wanted to add with that is, I often let, I do a quick check-in. Mine's very superficial from my end. I usually only share examples from my life and provide more of that other information when the individual shared something that I think needs to be normalized. So they've shared something like, oh, poor me, this person treated me like this. Then I might grab an example from my life and say, well, this happened to me and this is how I dealt with it. At the time I felt like you do. I understand what that feels like. So you're normalizing the situation rather than starting off with a story about myself. I'm letting them talk and then I'm picking little pieces. I think you said that as well. Just picking up on something and saying, hey, you know what, I'm just going to talk to that a little bit from my experience. I might be able to tie in there. And I think that's really useful in the dialogue that I have with my clients. Go ahead, Gabrielle, sorry.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
My question is, of all the string of questions that you asked a few minutes ago,
Yes.
I personally feel very uncomfortable going there.
Okay.
And wondering a couple of things, if other women feel that way, or if they feel that they can ask those questions, or if you think that it's better to leave those questions to any male member of the circle.
So I think I wouldn't recommend telling anyone to ask a question that's out of their comfort zone. I don't think that would be fair. We're volunteers. You don't want to go all stressed out about these things. Those are examples of things that I have to ask. It's my mandate to ask those questions. That's not your mandate. If there's somebody that feels more comfortable in your circle that wants to touch on those things, I think that's fair. Something you might want to try is you could use me, for example, or a facilitator. Your facilitator, I'm aware, program facilitator, parole officer, I'm aware, asks you a lot of questions about your sexuality. What kind of things do you tell them about how you're managing? Or maybe that's taking a little bit of the discomfort from you. I don't know. That's just a thought.
and Gabriel and Scott, I do really want to respond to that, because what happens if one person or one woman is not comfortable? They look at that person before they answer even myself when I'm asking them. So it's important that they know everyone in that circle is comfortable with the question. So if you're not asking it at all, and probably there's ways that you can word it, Gabriel, that you might be more comfortable with, and maybe we can talk about that, because I've had this discussion with core members, and if there's one person in the group who isn't comfortable, they're not going to talk about their masturbation or their deviant thoughts or anything. So it's one of the challenges as a volunteer is to learn how to do that. So I'm glad kind of you pointed that out, because Tina and Anita, who are part of the training team, I think we need to probably work on that again. And I know we had Scott one time and we had a session around that. Remember, Scott, how to ask those questions.
They are difficult. They get easier. They do get easier. I can say that as you get more comfortable asking them. but yeah, there's a certain comfortability there that
Yeah.
you know, it is, I guess in a lot of ways it is, you try to normalize it. You know, it doesn't have to be, I use language like problematic sexual interest, problematic sexual behavior, rather than saying deviant, you know, fantasy and stuff like that, because it's just not how we talk. And if we're having a conversation with somebody, a regular conversation, I've never asked them that in that way. You know, I think CoSA is, you know, I think you would be, and I've used it. How do you how do you shoot,
Monitor?
not self monitor, why is it lost in my brain? Come back.
Regulate?
You know, I'm basically saying masturbate, but
Yeah,
I'm
what
trying to
is
say
the
that
euphemism? Yeah.
self-regulate. How would you self-regulate, you know, your sexual urges?
Yeah.
You know, do you feel that you're doing that? You know, it's trying to normalize it. I think, you know, it is something that it's part of human nature. It's something we all have to manage and control and be in charge of. But these guys struggle with being in charge of that and managing. So I think it's a conversation that is important. You know, I even sort of, I'm careful on how I approach it, but you know, I try to make sure that they understand it can be a normal behavior. However, what does it look like when it's not normal, right? And when it becomes abnormal. So but yeah, Gabriel, very they are very uncomfortable and difficult areas to touch on, but it does get easier. and work with your core members, work with your group and your supports. Like that's where we get better at things. It's you know, and it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. You know,
yeah, I think from my perspective as a female as well, I always feel like if I ask those questions, it's on behalf of the group. So I know that I'm not alone. So that makes it somehow less awkward. Like I wouldn't one-on-one talk to the core member like that, but I know I'm in a group and I'm voicing something that the group is probably concerned about. So that makes it easier, I find.
Yeah.
There's also, you have to ask the same questions basically of your female offenders. And if you accept it the same way, if you're really having trouble, Gabriel, of asking a man what his sexual release mechanisms are, however you want to phrase it, imagine you're asking a woman the same thing. Because it really boils down to it's the same problem, it's the same solution, it's the same urges, just different plumbing. And it's uncomfortable for us to talk about it, but it really is very mechanical, and it's something that all have to face. And as someone has already said, these people do not face it well and they do not control it well. So their discomfort or lack of comfort with talking to you about how they do deal with their sexual urges and pressures can push you to feel uncomfortable. But if you're very clinical about it, and as I said, maybe even try imagining you're asking a woman the same question, it may be easier for you to express those questions.
Thanks, Richard.
And you know what it is? It really is hard because, you know, I mean, I've been doing it for 20 years, so I don't find it so hard. But I mean, I have five brothers. I have 3 boys, right? I mean, I would never in my wildest dreams ask them what they do sexually or their sex life. So it's out of the ordinary for us. It is really hard. It's a learned thing. It's just part of CoSA. They're only there for one reason, because they've had trouble with their sexuality, right? And so if we're not dealing with that and comfortable, we're almost doing them a disservice, I think, you know.
And be careful. I don't think we have to ask every time we see them. You know, just make sure it's comfortable and it presents itself at the right time too. It would get very monotonous if every time I met with somebody, they asked me the same
Yeah.
same question. So, it make it natural, make it like, hey, you know what, I haven't asked. Sometimes I go, hey, you know what, I haven't asked you this in a while. That's how I start off the conversation, right? Tell me what's going on in this department, right? So like sometimes we laugh, right? So Bob, do you have something to say there?
Yeah, as being part of the training team, I definitely say to everybody who I am training that it's really important for all members of the volunteers to be equal participants with the core member, because, and we've had it in actuality where a core member will say, I didn't really want to respond to a particular question because I thought it would offend so-and-so. And we've had to actually say to the volunteer, you need to actually, be involved and ask the tough questions, because the flow of the group just does not work if the core member thinks that they want to hide certain answers or not say certain things because it's going to offend either a man or a woman in the group. So it's really, really important. And so I always stress, make sure that, every volunteer is an equal participant with regards to the types of questions that are asked and answered.
Yeah. Key part that stands out for me there, Bob, is that cohesiveness of the group, and how you guys are coming together and talking about those things. That's really important. I think that's how you get through these things and develop better practices and procedures and how you go forward, right? So very good. Great example. Thank you. There's a few more questions. Somebody asked, is it okay for the CM to masturbate? I think it's, I take the stance that I think it's healthy, to a certain degree. So, if, I've had, so just putting things in a couple examples, I have some clients that, have told me that they were fantasizing about their parole officer, and were masturbating like at great excess and watching a lot of pornography, to the point where they were developing sores on their privates, their sexual organ, because they were masturbating so much. So that is absolutely not healthy for that individual, for any individual. So, trying to come up with strategies that are healthy in that particular situation, there was a lot of discussion with the program facilitator, myself, and the individual. If we have a psychologist or a mental health worker on board, we get them involved. So that's at another level, but that's definitely excessive and problematic behavior that we're talking about there. Mm-hmm. But is masturbation a bad thing? I think there's probably enough evidence out there to say that, and I don't want to go against faith or anything like that, but scientifically speaking, it's not an unhealthy thing. Let me just put it that way.
If I could respond to that, from a CoSA perspective, when a core member talks about masturbating, our question to them is what you are thinking of appropriate or inappropriate? We can't go any farther than that. We can't have our religious views in it. We don't condone it or say it's evil or it isn't good. What we say is what are you masturbating to? What are you focusing on, right? And that as far as we can go. As far as doing damage, I don't know if you know this particular, but one of our core members, Scott, I don't know if you've had anything to do with him, but he has a permanent catheter because of severe damage he did. And so that is, it isn't common, but if we have one of our 42 with a catheter because of it, it is something to be aware of, that they can damage themselves with more than just sores. Not that this is a good way to end the conversation, but that's our role. in
But I think
CoSA.
I think very good points, and all, and all this dialogue is healthy to have, and a good conversation to have. I see a question here. I just want some clarification on it. How to convince a CM that targeting younger men for sex is not right when the CM feels these young men are consenting adults? Gotcha. So obviously we have a CM who is interacting with other younger men who are of consenting age. I guess I guess the question on that comes down is if it's a consenting relationship, do I encourage, do we encourage anyone to have relationships that aren't age appropriate? I would think that we all think it's healthier for anyone to have age appropriate relationships. In this case, I guess we're looking here, is this person very sexual active? Are they trying to have sex with lots of different partners? Because that wouldn't be considered really necessarily a healthy lifestyle, especially for somebody who has a past sex offense history. And it would probably lead them into some patterns of behavior that would be problematic. However, are they seeking out one particular relationship? Are they trying to have a healthy relationship? What's the detail or the significance behind that relationship? In a alternative lifestyle relationship, I shouldn't say alternative lifestyle, fringe behavior that's not the norm in society, I guess, or on the fringe. There's terms that's not coming to me. Sorry, I'm trying to be political correct with with my terminology. But when a gay men are in a relationship, there often is at times a significant age difference. Sex in the gay relationship, in gay relationships, tend to be two men thinking as men do. So sex tends to be a more fluid, and sexual behavior tends to be less, for the word, sacred, I guess, in a sense, in those communities, and in some cases, not in all cases. So it's hard to say that our experiences in a heterosexual relationship, we probably aren't going to relate.
Yeah.
So be careful on what we project as being right on them. And if it's consensual and a caring and healthy relationship, I don't know that we have a place to say it's not. So
this particular guy has many, and it was just starting off, and it's a very difficult situation because he is saying he does it for them. It's not about him, it's to please him. As a young boy, he didn't have the love and the thing, and it's safe to come to him. And it's right. Yep. Ken, I know you asked that question. So in this case, it's going to be a challenge to get him to see at all what he's done is wrong. We've only had one meeting, but it's been multiple, making young and pleasing them in a safe environment according to him. Right. So it's challenging. We have several that are on that circle on this call. So we'll see what happens next week, or next week.
It sounds like it's the answer to my question, which is that it's not a healthy sexual lifestyle this person's leading, and they are, sounds like, grooming and doing a lot of those behaviors. So I think all we can do is reinforce the inaccurate, the negative, maybe using lots of pros and cons and those types of things. Where are these relationships getting you? Are you feeling still alone at the end of the day? And those types of things, trying to encourage a person to see value in changing that behavior. But certainly sounds like a challenging member for sure. There was someone else who was trying to say something, and I'm trying to remember who it was. I'm just going through faces on the top of my board here.
I think Richard was mentioning the possibility of the power imbalance in a relationship where one's a lot older and one's younger. So
yeah, no, and that's certainly a factor in certain situations, because we can see that even in heterosexual relationships where one person might be using their financial stability and what have you to gain the advantage,
Favor.
or favor or whatever. Again, stuff we can talk about and discuss in the groups, but when we start to get into consensual relationships, it does make it a little bit harder. I think things like knowing their conditions here would be a good thing, because if they have conditions to report all relationships, they better be reporting all that sex or they're going back to jail. So those types of things are good to bring up in those circumstances. What do your conditions say? Are you allowed to be having multiple sexual partners? We have something called community assessments, which I'm sure most of you are aware of, that we have to do on an individual if they're going to have any relationship beyond sort of acquaintance. So if they're not following those conditions, they will go back to jail. So
He's following them and he agrees he has to, but what he did wasn't wrong, right? Except there were younger too, and so he does kind of own that. There was a 15 or a 17-year-old in the mixture. So anyway,
my very first, and I won't say core member because I hadn't even joined CoSA yet. I was helping this person through another thing, and I was brought into CoSA and realized this is somebody else's core member. We were only like, I was 1 day older than he was, and we were born in the same city, a couple blocks apart. So I kind of tried to understand it, but it was exactly the same, except to his preference was, he put it, trying to help young women get out of the street life. So he'd bring them into his house. And sometimes it became a sexual exchange. Sometimes it was just rent, sometimes, but it was the same thing that we're talking about, a massive power imbalance that he justified by saying, I'm helping somebody who's not necessarily if they wanted to. They all had to call him Papa or Uncle or something like that. Yeah.
That's certainly a big power imbalance, and he's coercing these people into behavior. I've talked to a lot of different offenders over the years. I like some of my gangsters that I work with, because I work with not only sex offenders in Maple Ridge, I work with everyone, and sometimes I get these gangsters who speak a big game of how they live their life, and they share certain details to, I guess, impress me. And I point out that actually, when you're dangling drugs in front of a woman and dealing with prostitutes, that actually makes you a sex offender. They don't like hearing that, but it does give me a power advantage. So I often use it. But just pointing out that some of these behaviors are very unhealthy, and so a little humor there with the gangsters. I see Andy laughing.
Okay, Scott.
Yeah.
It's been very interesting, and I really hate to break up this really interesting discussion we're having, but I'm just looking at the time. We've actually run 15 minutes over already. So how would you like to proceed? I think people might need to go. I'm sure they'd like a part 2.
No, it was brilliant. I appreciate it. I was actually on the last slide, which was just coming together like this, having trainings and being a group, and working together, sharing our discomforts with one another, asking for help from one another, and that's the only way. I'm not going to lie to you, I feel left alone a lot of the time, which is too bad. I shouldn't be, but I honestly have to go out of my way to find resources a lot of times for my colleagues, because we're just always busy and so many clients, and sometimes I'm just feel like I'm flying by the seat of my pants. So it's lovely that you have CoSA, and I'm grateful to have CoSA to have these conversations as well. So
Well, you're
I
always
appreciate
welcome
it.
to be with us, and we'd always appreciate you having this talk with us. Anita's raising her hand. I think she wants